maye. Wathi uyathetha ngamthanda maye. Maye, 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 maye. Maye, 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 maye. Wathi uyakhala ngamthanda maye. Wathi uyakhala ngamthanda maye. Wagibela ihashe ngamthanda. Wagibela limnyama ngamthanda maye. Wagibela limhlophe ngamthanda maye. Yema mama, yema. Othi ngibambeni, ngibambeni, ngibambeni. Ngibambeni, ngibambeni, ngibambeni. Maye, 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 maye. Maye, 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 maye. Ngibambeni. Ya mama, ya mama, ya mama. Wagibela ihashe ngamthanda maye. Wagibela limhlophe ngamthanda maye. Shia, oh, shia, shia, oh, shia. Sanmonani. Sanmonani. My name is Zawadi Amungu, and I'm from Mandeni. The name Zawadi Amungu is in Swahili, meaning a gift from God. From my biological name, Nkosingphile Wagampanza. I'm playing a bow here. Umakweyana bow. It's an ancient instrument. It was mostly played by Princess Magogo, Kadinuzulu. We are trying to preserve these instruments for our generation and future generations. Nakulishona, nakulishona zibuyele ngakithi. 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 Azibuye maseleni, zibuye maseleni, zibuye maseleni, zibuye maseleni. Azibuye maseleni, azibuye maseleni, azibuye maseleni. Tomo zobaba azibuye maseleni. Nakulishona, yeah, buyele ngakithi. Nakulishona, nakulishona zibuyele ngakithi. Nakulishona, nakulishona zibuyele ngakithi. Nakulishona, kulishona zibuyele ngakithi. Thank you. I wanted to also play a handpan, but I don't have like a chair or high chair. Yeah, maybe then we can just to alternate instruments. So we'll have to fill both instruments. These are indigenous instruments. Thank you. Thank you so much. This is the last song. Is it audible? Thank you.
That keeps occurring every time when I'm about to speak, I move to the podium. They always try to adjust the mic, which is to remind me that I am challenged. I'm not always tall enough, and sometimes most of the time, unfortunately, they never push it up. They always have to adjust it downward. And so it sends the message, a very, very clear message to me all the time that I'm not tall enough for podiums. But thank you so much to Zawadi. It's a great joy that you have just served us so well with that great music of Princess Makoko, ezingasoze zabuna, what you've just given to us. And we are very, very grateful for that. Welcome, friends, the Vice Chancellor of our university, Professor Nana Poku, the DVCs who in our midst, Professor Mkize and Professor Mudau, who are here, the deans. I've seen Professor Hlongwa. I'm not sure if there are other deans that I've missed, but members of council who are here, Dr. McKay is here that I've seen. I've also seen Dr. Pumla Mganga, she's somewhere in this crowd. Oh, yes, yeah. I've seen other people who are here. I've seen Professor Mazibugo in our midst. I've seen the guest speaker for today, Professor Malkhaburu Mahoba. And after 9 years of being away from this institution, I'm really stunned that you are still so fresh. It's wonderful to see you and have you back there. We remember the great days when you were still steering the ship and making sure that UKZN continues to inspire greatness. And we also welcome the respondents, the fellow panelists, Dr. Doris Etan, and in Twetwe Like, who is here, and then the publisher, that's Professor Mutobi Mutwazi, in our midst. We welcome you, sir, with everyone else who is here, who is part of this great event, where we are going to be launching Professor Mahoba's latest book, titled Leadership for Transformation Since the Dawn of South Africa's Democracy. And we are no doubt happy and excited that our Corporate Relations Office, under the direction or directorship of Ms. Zondo, has helped us to come together to listen to you. We've had it on TV. I must say that I've been looking for it at least in 3 exclusive books in the airport, and then couldn't get it. And I'm excited that I know some of us believe in divine intervention. So I couldn't get it in 3 exclusive books in airports, but I ended up getting a free copy, which is exciting. So I might as well not have found it in those bookshops, but today I have it. And thank you very much for that. So we do welcome everyone who is here, and we are looking forward to a great day of reflection and conversations. And we are going to invite our DVC and principal of the College of Humanities, Professor Mkize, to come forward and give a word of welcome. Let us welcome Professor Mkize. Thank you.
Ngiyabonga Program Director Mbulazi, thank you very much. Program Director, Professor Kumalo, Professor Malechapuru Makhoba, the founding Vice Chancellor of the University of KwaZulu-Natal and author, Professor Mtluatse, the publisher, members of the executive who are present here today, current and former members of council, members of Senate, students and staff, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Vice Chancellor, Professor Nanapoku, we extend a warm welcome to each of you gathered here today for the launch of this exceptional Leadership for Transformation Since the Dawn of South Africa's Democracy, a book authored by Professor Makhoba. Welcoming Professor Makhoba to the University of KwaZulu-Natal feels a bit out of place, considering that he is no stranger to this institution, and indeed he is the founding Vice Chancellor of the university. In fact, anyone who has studied the history of the University of KwaZulu-Natal would agree that Professor Makhoba played a huge role in overseeing the merger and leading the transformation agenda of this institution. It is therefore impossible to narrate the full history and story of the university without any mention of Professor Makhoba and his leadership. We at the university are therefore honored that Professor Makhoba thought it appropriate to launch his book at UKZN. The book is significant because it explores a crucial but contentious topic: leadership in post-apartheid South Africa. The timing of this book's release is perfect because leadership is currently a hot topic of conversation on a number of platforms. This implies that the country is reflecting on our leadership style and its wider implications for the future of our nation. The focus on political and governmental leadership as we approach the national elections of next year may be a major factor in this introspection. It can also be a result of the plethora of challenges facing our country. These include the moral, political, social, and economic challenges that this country continues to grapple with. As a result, the timing of the book's release could not be more appropriate, as it encourages a collective reflection on the path we are taking and the principles we uphold. This book is undoubtedly an invaluable instrument to assess our country's progress and future directions. We therefore eagerly await the author's insights on this book. We are equally anticipating robust engagements on the crucial topic of leadership. With these words, ladies and gentlemen, I welcome you to the University of KwaZulu-Natal. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Kabazela, for those warm words of welcome. Professor Makgoba, let me start by saying you've really done us proud and well with this book. I've had it only for 2 days, but I've really read quite a big portion of the book, and I'm quite excited and looking forward to you coming forward to address us on it, and knowing that you are a very strong and good scientist. We didn't allocate time because we know scientists are not men and women of too many words. So thank you very much, Prof. You can come forward. Thank you.
Well, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for this opportunity to come back to the University of KwaZulu-Natal after a period of 9 years, which I regard as a fairly good period to reveal the skeletons of the university that I saw when I was here. Be that as it may, first of all, I just want to thank all of you that are here. My colleagues are here. I see Mr. Poole is here, Mr. Trinda is here, Pumla is here, Andre is here, McKay is here, and I now see that SASCO has taken over the university again, and I remember I lived my life here with the university being ruled by SASCO, and I was quite disappointed when they disappeared from the political leadership, but such is the nature of change. So let me just give a broad sweep of the book, because there will be questions that you'll all want to ask. The first is, when I was preparing this book, I didn't guess that there would be an election in 2024. I prepared this book because I am a biologist by training, and in biology, a period of between 25 and 30 years represents what is called a generation. And clearly, the political mood in the country, like a generation change, requires change in the country. Because I think we cannot have the same leadership like Mr. Beer, who had to wait for 40 years when his family had benefited, to be told that your family has benefited too much, let's have a new leadership. So I was thinking about it in terms of biology, that 25 years is adequate enough to reflect. What is important is that I left South Africa in 1979 on the 5th of October to the UK. And I came back in August 1994. That was a period of about approximately 29 years from the time when I've arrived to now. It's exactly 29 years. So it corresponds with my reflections of having left the country, the changes that I underwent when I had left the country, because I became a different person from what I was when I was in the country, and to what I learned when I came back into the country in a new dispensation that was different from what I had left. And let me just maybe state what is obvious. What I tried to capture in the book is what you all know, that the South Africa of post-1994 is completely different and much better than the South Africa I grew up in, and most of you who are here are retiring or have retired, grew up in. So we're talking about not the current versus apartheid, but we're talking about the current as to how we have dealt with the current that we are dealing with. So let me make the first point. The book is a personal story of experiences. It's my experiences, no one else, and I take responsibilities for that. And I describe it as an odyssey. Most of you know what an odyssey is. It's a long journey full of adventure. Some adventures are painful, others are exciting. Nevertheless, it's full of adventure and it's a long journey. And 29 years is a long journey of having returned and having served 25 cabinet ministers over that period, 4 presidents of the country over that period, and having occupied various leadership positions either at universities, Medical Research Council, National Planning Commission, ESCOM, you name them. One was participating with that, and that's why I call it an insider story, because I worked with 4 of these presidents, I worked with 25 of these ministers closely, and I took the opportunity, like a scientist, to observe and analyze how they do things, what made them successful and what made them failure. So that's the Odyssey part of it, it's the personal experience. It's a reflection of what I've seen, and it's a critique of what I observed. One thing I made clear is that I did not want to shade the truth in writing my story. It had to be truthful. That truth could be painful to me, but it could also be painful to other people, but I was not going to shade it in any other form. So there was no sanitization of the truth. I just stated it as it is, as it's factually I could see it. Because I believe that through telling the truth, we can only improve and deepen our democracy. And as we go through this painful transition. I start the book not by my quotation, but a quotation from someone that you might know called Mr. Peter Wundler. He was the founder of an advertising company called Head Boys, but he was also a member of the kitchen cabinet that used to advise President Mbeki. There were 25 of them. I think one of them was Linda Zama. I don't know whether she will be here or not, an advocate. He makes the following point, and I quote so that I don't get him inaccurate and I get sued. Today, we have a broken country. He wrote this last year in December. The education system is a total mess. I'm sure the students would attest to that. The economy is teetering with unemployment rife. The healthcare system is approaching collapse, which I know very well as the health ombud, and I've articulated that, and I've been told all sorts of words. All these are the sine qua non of a failed state. Our infrastructure, our roads, our bridges, our railways, almost they're all beyond use. Crime is rampant to the point that South Africa is approaching a lawless state, such as would be the envy of Mexico and Colombia. That's how things have gone bad. Men have declared war on women and children. We must hand it to the ANC. It has mastered corruption to the extent that sometimes wondered who is not corrupt in the ANC. We certainly need help. Of course, God is everywhere, but he doesn't seem to be listening, because even God would cry if we had to go and ask for help from him at the way in which we are running the country. That was Peter Wundler in December. Of course, in order to write this book, I didn't do like Mr. Angelo Agrisi, who had videotapes and telephone calls and book records when he presented to the state capture. I just made observation made notes, and sometimes I wrote articles. So it largely depended on my powers of observation and investigations, which I've loved since I was a child, honesty and telling the truth. And I got a few people that would humanize my story, because as a scientist, I write very dry, and sometimes it can be very hurtful. So I managed to get my daughter, who is a little bit more kinder than I am, and my wife, to read through the story and make it a little bit more human and acceptable. And they seem to have done an excellent job, in addition to the editors that Mutobi found for me to try and use words that are more human than scientific, but nevertheless retain the facts and the truth. You can summarize the story of this book in 3 words: leadership, transformation, and teams. Because leadership appears 434 times in the book, in the text, transformation 332 times, and the cabinet or the teams appear about 287. So I'm talking about leadership, transformation, and teams. And again, I am a participant, because I've also been a leader, either at WITS or at UKZN or at the MRC or in the National Planning Commission or at ESCOM. So when I write about people, leadership style, and leadership demeanor, I also have to reflect on my own. Did I mess up things? Did I do things better or less better than others? But nevertheless, I just had to be honest. Let me give you an example. When I arrived in WITS in 1994, August, within 20 days of being at WITS, the students of SASCO, and that's why I remember SASCO so well, and I became their honorary member later on, and how took one of the administrators, the registrar, hostage. I had just arrived on the 1st of October. And because there was commotion, and I was Deputy Vice Chancellor, and the Vice Chancellor of the university comes to my office and says, you know, these are your people. Can you go and negotiate on my behalf? So I said, what do you mean they're my people? I have just arrived here 20 days ago. I don't know what you guys have been up to between the two of you, so between the various stakeholders. So I cannot negotiate in such a situation. Just because I grew up with these people, and of course they look like me, they speak like me, maybe they dance like me, but I couldn't go and be part of a negotiation of a situation that I don't understand. And that became a point of contention. But nevertheless, it's part of the things that you realize in South Africa, that when we are trying to create this so-called non-racial, non-sexist, equitable society, we come into it with baggages and so forth. Let me come to this university. I came here in 2002, and then in 2003 we were preparing for the merger. In 2004, on the 1st of January, or just before that, as the executive, we decided that the headquarters of this university would go and be at Westville. Now, I was the interim vice chancellor. I had been the vice chancellor of the University of Natal, and I am now saying the headquarters of the new university must be at Westville. Now, you can imagine the wrath that I got for doing that. I had betrayed the University of Natal. Unfortunately, as Vice Chancellor, like as President of the country, you don't often talk about everything. What the University community of Natal did not know was the idea of making the headquarters at Westville had come from Professor Ronnie Miller, one of them. It had not come from Makgoba, but Makgoba took all the flack for being a betrayer of his former university because he's emotionally detached from it. That's one example of the things that you have to deal with as a leader. The second one is a very interesting example. When I arrived at Westville, there are cleaners there. And one of the cleaners, Zulu speaking, picks me up and says, I want to take you through the corridors of the administration, and you look at the doors and tell me, what are the same names here? Govender, Moodley, Ismail, whatever. And he says to me, Professor Makgoba, if you're going to drive transformation here, I think you could at least have a Smith somewhere there, a Dlamini, then we are moving. Now, as I say, this did not come from an academic. It came from a cleaner at the university. Because everybody, as far as I know, in South Africa, post-1994, was concerned about transformation, concerned about building a new society. So these are sort of the elements of the challenges that we faced. But I use this example because these are down-to-earth issues. You may take them superficially. Maybe the last example I'll give here for the university is that I got a report as Vice Chancellor that the student had failed, I think, in one of the science faculties at the time. And this student protested because he didn't understand why he failed. And I went back to the academics and asked them to look into the matter. And as it turned out, this student had got distinctions in almost all the subjects that he had failed. Now, I have to ask myself, it can be a statistical chance that you fail one, but when it becomes global and then it gets overturned, you have to ask another question. How could it happen? But as I say, these are challenges that we all failed. And maybe the last one was, there was a professor here who used to empower African academics. And that was the claim. And this professor ran a racket where he would supervise students for PhDs and masters. And he had his colleague somewhere in another university at the DUT. So he would always appoint this guy as the examiner at DUT. And that particular professor would give the students' thesis 80% without reading it. As soon as it comes from him, you get 80%. And the idea was that if he gave you 80%, any other examiner might give you 30% or so, but you still get 50% and you pass. I collected 10 of these dissertations and theses, took them to London, to an institution that analyzes theses and checks for their quality. And without exception, 10 out of 10 were plagiarized. But people were already employed, they were already working, they had got their degrees. Some of them were actually lecturers here at the university. So I had to find a political solution. You know what a political solution is? That's what South Africans do all the time. I couldn't fire them, but I fired the lecturer because I felt that this cannot be sustainable. So one had to deal with very difficult issues because he argued to the lawyers that he was empowering Africans. Because all the theses were of African students. And of course, the classic one was I took one of these theses. It was completely 100% plagiarized except for one word, which was either called because. That was the only innovation in that thesis that appeared. Because. And the person had passed. So I'm giving this example. They are real, they are factual. There's nothing that is being made up here. So that is really the context of the book. As I mentioned, I have worked with 4 presidents, and I want to share a few things about these presidents. I worked with President Mandela. In fact, that's the reason why I came back, otherwise I wasn't coming back. We had a long discussion about that, but you can find that in the book. Yes. One of the things that characterized President Mandela's leadership was that he wanted to reconcile the country. He wanted to build a new society based, I think, on the Freedom Charter and the impending constitution, and what he had already, I think, defended when he was undergoing the treason trial, that he didn't want one race to dominate another, and if he was prepared to die, he would die for that. But what also I think people forgot was that Nelson Mandela was also royalty. So he wasn't just a politician. He had been groomed in leadership, and he had been groomed as to how, I think, to lead groups of people, I think, from the time when he was a youngster. So I described him as a leader who was a coordinator because he brought people together, who was decisive because he made decisions. I think recently you're hearing about the Springbok emblem, that it should be removed and something like that. It was Mandela who decided we don't remove the Springbok emblem. And he argued for that. He won the argument. But he was decisive. He was a coordinator. But in addition, he was royal. In fact, I think everybody knows that there used to be a song in South Africa about Mandela, but Akona Tshwana le yena. We have never had anybody like that. Maybe we were never likely to have anybody like that. Mandela was like the Ayatollah of South Africa. You'll never have another Ayatollah Khomeini in the Middle East. He's the only very unique person. Then he was followed by President Mbeki, who was literally the president when Mandela was president, except that Mandela was ceremonial and Mbeki was doing the hard work of the cabinet. As you know, I think President Mbeki's contribution was really transformation, transforming the country actively, African identity, reconnecting South Africa with the rest of the African continent, the African Renaissance concept. So Mbeki was an intellectual leader, in fact, an arrogant African intellectual leader. And most of us who are arrogant like him, we were very proud that he was our president, because we had never had a president before who was just like that. But like all such bright people, he had a blind spot. He had a blind spot for Zimbabwe. He had a blind spot for AIDS. He had a blind spot for interfering everywhere. He wanted to govern everything, even the minutiae. And then he was followed by the famous and popular president, Mr. Zuma. Now, I describe Mr. Zuma, for those of you who listen to music, you know there is a famous musician in the state called Roberta Fleck. She had a song that is entitled, Killing Me Softly. And that's my description of Zuma. He could kill you laughing and gently, but he would die. Be that as it may, he was very popular, he's still popular, and he obviously created a system that I will describe as follows. Like Mandela, he was a coordinator. But he made decisions that were wrong all the time. They were always overturned by the courts. He found state capture and polished it for his own good. But that's not the only thing we should remember President Zuma for. He established the National Planning Commission that was supposed to decide on the strategy of the country, and it did that. He reversed the AIDS denial period of President Mbeki, in which lives were saved, lifespan was increased, and the quality of life improved in South Africa. He also acted on the idea of free higher education that I think was still debating, but nevertheless, he started that journey. And it's an important journey for higher education that students should have free education, however you define the criteria. But these are the things that President Zuma did. So I have described him as a very popular leader who went rogue at certain periods of his leadership. Then he was followed by the current president, Mr. Ramaphosa, who believes that he can run the countries through commissions, through task teams, instead of making decisions. He makes no decisions. You give him a problem, he'll find somebody to delegate to do the work. Sometimes, and he makes too many promises that he doesn't keep. Everybody knows that, but we just accept it. So when I wrote this and sent it to my daughter and asked him, what is the best way to describe this president we have? She described him as an avoidant leader. He avoids every time he has to make a decision. And I thought that was an important thing. But here is the story. When Mrs. Thatcher, or Margaret Thatcher, as most of you know her, when she was a leader, she used to say, you don't follow the crowd must follow you. Or the people you lead must follow you. In fact, Mrs. Thatcher was so tough that in Britain, she was described as the only cabinet minister with balls when the rest of her cabinet was males. So she had done something to the males to acquire their balls. But to quote a previous conservative leader, Sir Winston Churchill, Sir Winston Churchill once said that of all the qualities of leadership that you may have, if you do not have conviction or courage, you could as well kiss leadership goodbye. And that's what we have in the current president. No conviction, no courage. So he's an avoidant leader. So then I had to work with several ministers. I worked with Kada Asmal, Sibusiso Bengu, Trevor Manuel, Aaron Mutsoaledi, Isop Pahad, the late Isop Pahad, Nkosazana Zuma, Naledi Pando. All these people are characterized by one thing. They knew what they were doing. They understood the mission of transformation. And actually, most of them delivered what they were supposed to do. Trevor Manuel in finance. Kada Asmal in higher education. Sibusiso Bengu, the same thing, laid down the foundation for transformation. Ben Ngubane was ahead of his time before he went to ESCOM, obviously, in terms of the Department of Science, Technology, Arts and Culture. Now you then come to the current crop of cabinet or the team. We have about 65 of them. 35 of them are deputy ministers. None of us know what their job description is. None of us know who they account to and what they account about. But they are entitled to free electricity, to free water, blue lights. Sometimes they beat people on the roads, but nevertheless, it's their entitlement because we don't do anything. So we have a layer in our country of people who are looting the fiscus, but they are looting it legitimately because we have appointed them. We call them deputy ministers. So that's how you construct a team. The reason I talk about this issue of team is that in 1740, in the UK, when the first cabinet was announced, it was only consisted of 5 people. The Prime Minister, the Chancellor of Exchequer, which is the Finance Minister, the Minister of Defense, because Britain was an empire, Home Affairs, because Britain had to deal with the foreigners coming into Britain, and either the Minister of Health and so forth. And it was often recorded by Northcote Parkinson that the Prime Minister is the Prime Minister because he knows less than the other ministers. The other ministers are specialized. He is not a specialist. So as time went by, Britain obviously began to increase its cabinet ministers. At the moment, for a long time, it has stood at 21. And Parkinson, in his studies, made the conclusion that any cabinet that is more than 21 has lost its marbles or has lost the people that it leads and the confidence of the people that it leads. And when you look at the number of cabinets throughout the world, they fall within that spectrum or even less, except for China and India that have got populations of 1.5 billion, 1.4 billion or something like that. Ours, it's about 30 for a country with 62 million people. Now, when you complement it with deputy ministers, it comes to about 65. So we have a bloated cabinet that we don't understand, and the members of this cabinet don't know what they're doing. Some are nurses, now they're running transport. I mean, you ask yourself, what's the relationship? You know? Some haven't even gone to school, but they are running things that school people know, but they're not there. So we have an unequal status of affair, but I think we need to deal with it as South Africans. So as I say, I worked for this. Now, I served as Deputy Vice Chancellor at WITS. I tried to initiate the process of transformation there. Obviously, I was chased away. So the transformation process at WITS, I described it in the book as a failure. It was aborted, but it was the tensions of the time in 1994, 1995. I then went to the MRC, which was a different organization, and it was transformed rapidly and quickly. And then I came to UKZN, where I think all of you can decide whether the transformation process that took place here is a success or not. But nevertheless, I can say after 9 years of having left, you are still standing. You haven't banned the libraries and the books and the buildings of learning, although occasionally I watch that buildings have been banned at my old university. A luta continua. But nevertheless, I think you are working on the process of transformation. And from where I'm sitting, we started with a university that was not the best amongst equal. And I had a mentor who was the Vice Chancellor of the University of Cape Town, the late Professor Saunders. And when he heard that I was being chased away to come here to UKZN, he said to me, do me one favor. When you go to the University of Natal and whatever, try and create an institution that is a powerhouse academically. Because every year I have professors from UKZN, from Natal, applying to Cape Town. And when I ask them in the interviews why, they say, well, because UCT is senior to Natal. And he didn't understand that. So one of the challenges we faced when we started this major was academic excellence. That had to anchor whatever we did in the change. The students wanted to be taught by the best people. The academics had to be best. Now, there was a big debate here, a brouhaha that went into the media, that Makgoba is chasing people. And I wasn't chasing anybody. I was just setting criteria that were normal in a university, that as a university teacher, your minimum qualification had to be a PhD. It's happening everywhere in the world. But here, there were all kinds of all-boy networks that were working, enjoying themselves, and they could protect each other. So when you did that, you were seen as a villain rather than somebody who was trying to champion transformation. Be that as it may, when we started, we had a very low percentage of our staff with PhDs. We had a low productivity rate. We were not ranked amongst the best universities in the world, and today we are, and we have a high percentage and a growing percentage of PhDs. The productivity levels are growing every day at the university. In fact, when I left here for 2 consecutive years, UKZN was the best research productive university in the country. And it had moved, in the top 100 universities in 3 world rankings as an institution. So from that perspective, we were doing something right. But obviously, you couldn't do that without pain. Because transformation is not without pain. If you think you can do that, maybe you need to be anesthetized, have a general anesthesia, then you can have transformation, and I doubt if you will have it. So, colleagues, I'm going to conclude in a short time. This book took me 23 years to write. It has 130,000 words. It has approximately 145 notes or references, divided into approximately 300 pages of 9 chapters. And as I say, it is quite referenced. It has been forwarded by Thuli Madonsela, and I just need to quote her. And she says, this book was motivated by the downward spiral and crisis of national leadership that characterizes South Africa today, and the role politics and the media have played in the project. A country of so much hope in the 1994 Mandela era has fallen like a meteorite, rapidly regressing and being rained through rudderless leadership. You know what rudderless means? It's not like rubberless or spineless, but it is rudderless. Corruption, rampant crime, violence, poor governance, and poor economic growth, all increasing inequality, unemployment, and poverty. Now, anybody who has gone to ANC rallies, a few of you might have been there, you see when the ANC leadership, they stand up, they look at the clock and they start, tapping it, talking about that they must start things in time, that they must have unity, and they sing and jive around. And you look at the evidence on the ground, they never start in time. There's no unity, and there's no renewal that we're seeing. Factually, we hear the chorus, but we don't see the evidence. Through songs, they sing. Through poetry, they say whatever they want. But we don't see the evidence. And you must ask yourself, how long are you going to listen to the song before you see something happen? And in my book, I say, over this period, I've seen no unity or renewal in the national leadership. All I've heard are songs, never-ending apologies, wake-up calls, and asking for forgiveness. Even God would run away or simply cry from such requests. If we as South Africans ask God, he will disappear because he will be fed up also. Are we a mafia or a failed state? I will leave this as a question, but I will describe what a mafia state is. In my book, I make it clear that perhaps President Zuma, through his omissions or commissions, might have unintentionally laid the foundations for a mafia state. And I define a mafia state not from my own words, but a mafia state is interpreted sagely or wisely as an influential, through an influential article that was written by Moses Naim, a Venezuelan journalist. And this person writes as follows: in a mafia state, high government officials actually become integral players in, if not the leaders of criminal enterprises. And the defense and promotion of those enterprises, businesses, become the official priorities. We have seen that in our own country all the time. The leaders, through the Zondo Commission, whether you've read it or not, it points out to our own leaders driving the process of corruption. But nothing happens to them. Nobody wears yellow overalls or orange overalls. So we are in this phase. Now, in medicine, when you test for pregnancy, you can never say somebody is a bit pregnant. You are either pregnant or not pregnant. Of course, people in the community, they will tell you, I'm just a little bit pregnant, or I've just got a touch of cancer. There's no touch of cancer. You either have cancer or you don't have it. There's no touch of cancer. But that's how we talk in order to sort of alleviate, I suppose, the pain and the anxiety. I'm going to make a bold statement that we are a mafia state and we are a failed state. It is our duty to correct the situation in which we are. 7 years into the merger, when I was Vice Chancellor, I had to analyze what we were doing in the merger. And I wrote an article, you can refer to it, it's in the Mail and Guardian. I entitled it, Change is Never Easy. And I said why it is never easy, because it touches comfort zones and it asks all of us to do things that we never thought we would do. But at the end of the day, it's never easy and it's often very painful. And I just want to conclude through one of our former alumni, Dr. Mampela Rampela, who actually wrote a letter to the president, but I'm not quoting that letter because it's in the book. Mampela says, the future we desire is in our hands as citizens to shape. So only we as citizens can shape the future that we want. I think Gandhi said it in a slightly different way. We must liberate ourselves from dependence on abusive public representatives and officials. I remember when I first came back into South Africa and I went to Cape Town and I arrived in Cape Town and I went into the urinals where it's called the gents, I think, somewhere here. And in that gents there was a little graffiti of a young boy who was holding his endowments, and it says, "The future is now in your hands." Ladies and gentlemen, the future is in our hands, whatever we hold. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you very much, Professor Makgoba. We can give him another round of applause. Thank you very much. Now, the two panelists come from the social sciences, and therefore, because they've got a lot of words, we've limited them in terms of time. And so, we've spoken about it. So I would like to give them the opportunity. The first one is Dr. Dorcas Etang, who is senior lecturer at the School of Social Sciences. And soon after she is done, Mrs. Ntatua Like, who is a student, a master's student of social sciences, will follow her and speak after that. And then after that, before we get into the questions, Zawadi will come forward just to wow us again with her magic voice, and then we can get to the questions. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I would like to start by thanking Prof. Makgoba for this essential book. This book provides an important and deep reflection on leadership and why transformational leadership is a must to salvage the current situation and rebuild a new future. In my response, I have a few things to raise from the book. The first is two broad themes that emerged for me are transformational leadership and accountability. So the first question for me was the need to reflect on transformation before leadership. What values and track record should a potential leader have before stepping into high-level leadership? Do they show the values needed for leadership before they are voted or selected into that role? Have they showed courage, decisiveness, conviction, integrity, and vision before they are appointed? Another key question is, what makes a transformational leader in Africa? What documented principles, values, and messages define leadership in Africa? Are those in leadership aware of these values? Do they practice these values? And you pose a key question in your book, Prof. Has the time not arrived to revisit and review our criteria and the rationale for the choice of our leaders? And so do we need to review the reasons why we appoint them? And if we can determine what transformational leadership is in Africa, we cannot accept anything less. And this is a responsibility for us as citizens. If you cannot meet that standard and that definition of transformational leadership with evidence, then you have not made the mark. Third question, who are the examples of transformational leadership on the continent? Do we have examples and can we learn from them? Prof, in your book, you provide a long list of examples from history, from the media, sports, religion, and other sectors. So this book provides lessons of what being a good leader entails. And Prof uses the work of Meredith Belbin and his team role theory. From the past and the present, how can we bring these case studies into mainstream politics and develop standards to measure and select leadership? How do we measure these standards and measures? So we do have examples of leadership on the continent, but do our leaders know these good examples? And so why have they then failed to imbibe these values if they see these examples around them? Another question for me as I read this book, and it's a simple question, is why do African leaders not care for their citizens? Two examples come to mind. In Zaire, Mobutu Sese Seko looted the country's treasury of about $5 billion US. This amount covered the external debt of the country. In Mexico, the brother of the former president amassed $120 million, the brother, not the president, as a result of corruption. This amount would have covered annual health care for 594,000 Mexican citizens. This is how bad corruption is. So what is this evidence of this lack of care? Many commissions, great recommendations, no implementation. Do they care? Corruption is at an all-time high. Do they care? For many people, there is a feeling that leaders do not take their views into account or listen to them. And so what is transformational leadership within the context of this book? For me, reading the book, transformational leadership is one where leaders find sustainable and innovative ways to address societal challenges, crime, poverty, unemployment, organized crime, and improve various sectors like health, create a thriving environment for entrepreneurship and skills development. Transformational leadership requires the collective. It is difficult to do it alone. There must be a collective of individuals that have the same values and are like-minded. There is power in the collective, and transformational leadership requires that. Transformational leadership is one that is centered on consultation and is citizen-centered. Transformational leadership involves simplifying government, removing red tape and delays and bureaucracy, addressing slow systems, and Prof, in your book, you reflect on bloated cabinets. We need to review our cabinets. So in achieving transformational leadership, we will need to shift from the status quo and critically examine these structures and how they are set up. Very central to this is the lack of knowledge and skills to manage a portfolio. And Prof alluded to this as well. And so do those in charge of various portfolios have the skills and the knowledge to do so? The other theme is the lack of accountability. When accountability is absent, transformational leadership cannot thrive. Yes, we can have excellent anti-corruption agencies, we can have reports from various commissions, but the question is, are leaders self-accountable? Self-accountability means taking responsibility for your action and not blaming others. And are you willing to face the consequences in that process? And so as leaders, is there a time for self-reflection and self-awareness? Corruption, of course, is the big challenge. And in the book, Prof, you describe how corruption, corrupt leadership, and mediocrity is glorified, and how incompetence is normalized. You define corruption as a pandemic, a culture, and something that has been institutionalized. And so a culture of corruption means it has grown into every aspect of society. And corruption is protected by those who want it to remain. The focus on materialism is also identified in the book. There's a focus on material possessions rather than the value they can add to the society. In conclusion, what is the cost of leadership? What is the cost of transformational leadership? Why should someone lose their life because they're a leader? Can a leader not be honest, full of integrity, transparent, without being afraid of losing their life? Fear can perhaps inhibit or prevent transformational leadership from taking ground. And so, as Prof mentioned already, transformational leadership comes at a cost. Do we have up-and-coming leaders that have so much potential and are willing to undergo self and individual transformation to take up roles as transformational leaders? And so in my conclusion, Prof, I think this is a required reading in all leadership institutes and programs, and this should be used in grooming the leaders of the future. Building transformational leaders must not be ad hoc or loosely developed. In your final statement in the book, you write, "In my opinion, and from these reflections, I may be wrong, but the future of our country, our hopes and aspirations are squarely in our hands and not in the current leadership." And I reflected on this. As citizens, we have potential as future leaders. And so how can we begin to reflect on our contribution even to the country? Thank you.
Thank you.
Sanbonani, namaste. Prof, when I was waiting for your book, I was a bit worried because I read one of your papers. It was about bibliometrics. So when I was reading it as a social scientist, I was struggling a lot because of the language that was used. So when I was waiting for your book, I was a bit anxious. But after reading it, I was happy and, well, I enjoyed the book. It was a sweet read, and I would like to thank the editors too. So, when I was reading the book, it took me back to 2019. I was going to meet my supervisor, and it was before I defended my dissertation. On my way, I met one of my former lecturers. He asked me, what is your topic? And I said, it's about decolonization of higher education. And then he said, what? He couldn't understand why I was even looking at that. And it was after FISMA's fall movement. It was shortly after, well, I don't remember. But he said, I don't understand people who are crying for decolonization. There's no need for that. Firstly, as a black person, you can't compare yourself to a white person. And he said, as an institution, as UKZN, you can't compare yourself to Harvard. And I was confused afterwards, and I think I didn't even go to my supervisor. I didn't see my supervisor that day. I was confused, and I actually cried. The reason why I cried is because the people that we entrust with our knowledge production, with molding the minds of young people, the people we actually entrust with this transformation journey are the people who don't believe in it. And I was a student here at UKZN, and for him to say that while you are claiming to be a premier of African scholarship was quite upsetting for me in general. And when I was reading the book spoke to me. It spoke to that girl in 2019. It was healing for me. And it spoke to me as someone who is, I'm a tutor at Podcast Sciences. I'm a Podcast Sciences tutor. It spoke to me as a tutor, what kind of a tutor I ought to be, and also how do I take the responsibility for transformation in general, especially when it comes to transformation of the curriculum. Prof, you speak of elements. I'm going to repeat them because they touched me deeply, the elements of leadership. You say that a leader must be courageous, decisive, must have conviction, integrity, must have vision, and sometimes must be stubborn. And they have to, this one was important to me, must have an ability to choose their team. And I believe that is important for the leader to choose their team wisely, because their team are going to help them to actually reach their vision in general. So the question is, I think also you have answered that partly, I think. No, I don't think you have, because you have actually given us an empirical evidence on how do we support our leaders as citizens and as leaders in our small Lanyana corners. You have actually given us some ways we can actually help the leaders reach their potential, to reach their vision in general. But how do we serve leaders that don't have integrity? How do you support them? How do you support leaders that do not have courage or are not decisive? How do you help them do that? Because at the end of the day, it's not about the leader, it's about the country, it's also about the university in general. How do you help that leader to actually build the country? So that's the first question that came to my mind. And you spoke about how the academic staff was leaving from UKZN to UCT, and you see a lot of that right now. A lot of people, a lot of academics, a lot of talent are leaving UKZN, I believe, because of sometimes how they are treated as staff and the resources that are available here and all that. So, and a few months ago, my mom asked me, why are you still in South Africa? Why aren't you going somewhere else? Because you can see the country is going south. Why are you still here? Why aren't you leaving South Africa? Because there are greener pastures outside South Africa. We are seeing a lot of young people looking for opportunities outside the country. So for me, that is problematic because firstly, we are losing a lot of skilled labor. A lot of potential is leaving the country because of the current situation in South Africa. And we are grateful that you actually came back to serve the nation. And we continue to actually enjoy the legacy. But for people who don't feel a need to stay in South Africa, how do you make them stay? How do we make sure that we develop the youth that is here in South Africa? How do you make sure that that responsibility that you felt as a person, as a South African, how do we actually inspire those young people to stay in South Africa and build South Africa despite the leadership that we have? Yes, and also I think one thing we need to confront is xenophobia in South Africa, because I believe that a lot of world-class academics are leaving South Africa because of xenophobia, because of working conditions in South Africa. So how do we deal with that in general? And I would like to, you have written a lot about accountability and how, and your leadership. You are not just writing about leadership. You have given us examples of how you handled situations in the country, in the institutions that you ran and all that. And thank you for that. And because of you, when you were a leader here, it was clear to everyone, because I did my first year in 2012, and you were a VC at that time in this institution. And even for me, as a first-year student, I knew that you had certain requirements for the staff. I knew that you expected your staff to actually publish. You expected your staff to have PhDs. You expected your staff to drive the transformation legacy, or the transformation in general. And for that, we are thankful. And for me, one thing that because I believe that right now we're blaming apartheid, right now we're blaming colonialism, but in 30 years' time, we are going to be asking ourselves, what did we do as a country? What is our role as a country? Because after 30 years, we will have the nation that we deserve. We'll have the vast university that we deserve. Thank you.
Such a lot to take in. Can I check here? Thank you. Such a lot to take in. We just need to shake it off a bit. You can play. Sound. Sound again. Okay. Please restart then. Please restart. Please restart. Please.
Mawubona inwele zami zincome ngoba zinhle. Oh Mawubona inwele zami zincome ngoba zinhle. Mawubona ibala lami lincome ngoba lihle. Mawubona ibala lami lincome ngoba lihle. Ibala lami lihle, amabele ami mahle, ifika yami inhle, isinqe sami sihle, uhamba kwami kuhle, isitho sami sihle, ibala lami lihle. Mina ngintsundo futhi ngimuhle. Ngaze ngamuhle. Mawubona inwele zami zincome ngoba zinhle. Inwele zami, mawubona inwele zami zincome ngoba zinhle. Inwele zami, can you give me a volume? Mawubona ibala lami lincome ngoba lihle. Ibala lami, mawubona ibala lami lincome ngoba lihle. Ibala lami ke lihle, amabele ami anjani mahle. Okay, ifika yami injani inhle. Okay, kanye nomkhaba wami unjani muhle. Okay, isinqe sami sinjani sihle. Alright, igwegwe lami linjani lihle. Okay, imqondo yami injani mihle. Mina ngintsundo futhi ngimuhle. Mina ngimuhle nebala lami linsundu. Mina ngimuhle nesitho sami nemqondo yami. Mina ngimuhle nopetelo wami oluhle. Mina ngimuhle, 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 muhle, ngimuhle, muhle, ngimuhle, muhle, mina muhle noma ngayifaka ngefrontal. Mina ngimuhle nje, ngimuhle nebala lami, ngimuhle nemqondo yami, ngimuhle nesishwapha sami. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was really affirming and highly appreciated from Zawadi. Now, this is the time where we are to engage with Professor Makgoba and the panelist. And I'm wondering if Prof would like to respond first to the questions that were raised by the panelists. Then we can take questions from the floor. Just for the next 5 to 10 minutes, have a conversation from the front. Okay, let's do it that way. Thank you.
Thank you again, Program Director. I just want to answer roughly 2 questions.
You can sit down. There's a mic there
Yeah,
if you want.
it's fine. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
I think people want to know about this word transformation. And I've got several ways in which I want to bring it to you. When I think the African National Congress was established in, is it 1912? And it went on to the process of the struggle. The whole idea of the struggle was to change the conditions in South Africa and the people of South Africa.
Yeah.
So they didn't use the word transformation, but basically the underlying principle of that struggle was to change the society in which the majority of the people lived. That's the first. So for so long, that's what we were struggling for or fighting for. Then the Freedom Charter came in, and it was a document that was written by a couple of intellectuals and academics, and it promoted the idea of transformation and a change of a new country in South Africa. Move forward, you come to the Constitution of the Republic. So the Constitution of the Republic enjoins all of us to transform all spheres of life in South Africa to create a new society. So when you are a leader in South Africa at this time, there are 3 elements that tells you what you must do is to transform. It's the struggle, it's the Freedom Charter, it's the Constitution, and lately in 2012, it was the National Development Plan. So there are 4 documents that have urged us to change the circumstances, the conditions, and the society in which we live. And that's why you can be any other leader in South Africa. If you don't do this thing called transformation, there's something wrong, because that's what you need to be doing. The second thing is there are opportunities, of course, in other countries, and why are we not seeking those opportunities? I just want to make a point. When I lived in the UK for 13 years, I had all the opportunities to succeed. In fact, I succeeded. But what could never be complete was that it was not my country. I could do whatever I like for myself, but there was nothing that tied me. You know, as they say in Sepedi, somewhere, your umbilicus has been tied somewhere. In fact, my kids used to know, they used to say it amongst themselves that, you know, if Daddy dies, we can never bury him here. He will become a ghost. We should take him home. So South Africa is our country. We are messing it up at the moment, but it's up to us to change it. It's our country. We should do whatever it takes to make sure it's a better country, it's a livable country, it's a country where you can be proud of what you do. Despite all these challenges, I think we have to face that music. I was quite excited to listen to the musician here. I remember when I was here and we wanted to introduce Zulu as a language. What a struggle it was. in a province where 80 to 85% of people speak Zulu. Now you can imagine if you didn't speak Zulu and this lady was singing here, none of you would have clapped hands.
Yeah.
None of you would have joined her because you wouldn't understand anything. But we wanted to live in a country or a province where everybody else dances, dreams, makes poetry in Zulu, but we don't want to learn Zulu. It was very strange, but it's just part of a small change that you need to think about. Of course, in the book, I talk about leadership. Now, I want to give you a simple example. Most of you recognize the president of the country as a leader because you have elected him at a rally or a conference. None of you would recognize that, what's this guy's name? Mahlatini.
Yes.
What was his first name?
Maotela Queens.
Of Maotela Queens. I think he had a SIPO something. Mahlatini. No one of you recognizes Mahlatini as a leader. But he's the person who came with Mbakanga. He created a band. He influenced so many of us in childhood. Before we started playing jazz or hearing jazz and thinking that we were Americans or something like that, we all listened to Mbakanga. Just like most of you have been to traditional healers. But when you are asked, you try to hide it. So during the day, you are Western people. At night, you are Africans. That's how you live your lives. And that's why you suffer from we all suffer from an identity problem, because the things that are ours, the things that are ours, we don't take pride in. Remember Ladysmith, Black Mambazo? They used to play here for us. And we just didn't care about it. They played funny music. And then comes, what is his name? Paul Simon. And then he just makes them sing a few things. Then this is the music we want to hear. In Zulu you have this word, Mlungu. In Sotho we say, that's how we live at the moment. But those are just my contributions to what has been raised here. Thank you.
Any follow-up comment or question, or should I go straight to the audience? Okay, thank you. Thank you, colleagues, friends. Let's go for it. Questions and comments to the author. We are really privileged to be able to speak. Yes, sir. Thank you very much. Yes. Yeah, okay, come with the mic.
Okay, yes, Mike.
Prof, in reading the book, Prof, in reading the book again, I've been pleasantly heartened with the depth and extent of your quietly applied perceptive powers and the leadership, observation and analysis that's in there. To what extent did your early professional skills and discipline aid your transition into management roles and enhance your leadership roles? And when did you first discover the Belbin-Meredith system? And why haven't you shared it with the government?
Let's take 3 questions and then Prof can respond. That is one.
Okay, another question that I want to ask. But I also want to comment. Can I just comment? Earlier on, there's a lady there who was talking about the people who are leaving UKZN to greener pastures. I just want to give you, based on my experience, I'm one of the students. I started here at University of KwaZulu-Natal, and then I did my undergraduate, master's, PhD. Now I come back for postdoc. I've been outside there. It's not what you think. What happened is that here at UKZN, things are much easier here. You can speak to professors, much open. I think Mahova and others who come after him, they created what you call conducive environment. I mean, when I was a student, I could go to Professor Johannes Jacobs, Dean, and other people. They will accommodate me. Outside is not like that. I was in another university outside. It's not like that. So my question to Makgoba is that you have been part of the government. You work with ESCOM. And then I just want to know what's your view on transformation there? Because some people are also living, they are following you. What's your view on the transformation? Do you think it's just an ideological white elephant where politicians would just make some slogan without delivering?
Thank you. Another one? Yes, Zwide. Yeah, there's a hand there. Can we get the mic to Mr. Zwide, and then we have here in the front after that? Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Program Director and the Professor. Professor, since you have been part of the government, I'll start with the university. My name is Muntu Ngumalo.
Yes.
I just introduce myself. I'm not a student of UKZN, no, I've never been. I'm part of the military Mkondo Wesizwe, Provincial Commissar. But one or two questions that I want to ask. I think your book is good, although I heard it for the first time from your presentation. I took some few notes and I would like to get a copy, that's the first thing. So that we teach our constituents, the MK. What programs, outreach programs did you create in the university during your tenure here? And to which places around the university that you assisted the communities? Because if you talk about transformation, you don't talk about the transformation in a silo, transforming a class or only the UKZN buildings, but the transformation to community. This is the first question I'm having, that during your stay, because we have been away for 9 years, at least now we are back, what programs were created at the university for transformation outside the university, not that, the outreach programs? That's the first question. The other one is related to what has been asked, that we had a problem with water in South Africa, sometimes water, drinking water. And we foresaw that after water we'll have another problem. We have electricity now, problem. And we've been part of ESCOM. I mean, we have the load shedding and the stuff. What solutions, because at times if you mention problems, we need solutions, that since you have been part of ESCOM, we have a load shedding that is affecting everybody, business, and everybody's affected. What was your contribution to avoid or to minimize our problem of load shedding that is affecting everybody? I think those are two questions. And last, as an academic, what have you influenced in for other academics who are not part of the UKZN? Because you said you had to get your headquarters in Westville. And what about other institutions? There is University of Unizul of Zululand. What influence or the impact did you create at that time when you were in part? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Zwide. Prof, take those and respond to them. We'll continue.
I think there are 3 already. Let me respond to the questions, I think, in the manner that in the opposite direction that they've been presented. Let me make it very clear. I was not part of government. I am a public servant. Let's get the distinction. I was not part of government. I worked with government people, but I'm not part of them. So the first question that you brought is, I was at ESCOM. I was also the health ombud. I was in the National Planning Commission. Now, I can take each one of those. In the National Planning Commission, the first one that was led by Trevor Manuel, we were asked to draft and create and analyze globally what is happening and what could South Africa do in order to have a national strategy that became known as the National Development Plan. We did an analysis of that, and we came out with 3 issues that were critical to South Africa: inequality, unemployment, and poverty. And we made a huge document that was proposed as part of a solution But the National Planning Commission was not an implementing structure because it is not legislated. It was an advisory to the government. So in 2012, we created that document with all kinds of proposals for what government can do. They never did anything. In fact, what they used to complain was, who are these people and who have elected them that they can tell us what to do? So that's the National Development Plan. At ESCOM, I came into ESCOM in 2018. And the reason why we were appointed into ESCOM as a board was not because of load shedding. It was because of state capture and looting. And I was particularly appointed there because I had a strong history of governance and putting systems together to cap looting. When I left ESCOM, there had been 2 independent evaluations of the governance structures at ESCOM. And if you care to read, you will find that the structures of governance at ESCOM had improved significantly. It's all documented by an independent investigation. So governance had improved at ESCOM. It was not eliminated, but it had improved from what it used to be. And in fact, you could tell from now that the looting was no longer concentrated inside ESCOM, but it was run by cartels outside ESCOM, as it has become now well known. The second thing that we did then when the load shedding, the second thing we did was we presented all the evidence to the Zondo Commission on the corruption at ESCOM. I was part of that. And after that, there were recommendations, and as chair of the board of ESCOM, we prepared a document for the president in order to respond to the findings of the Zondo Commission. It's still lying there with the president. We don't know what he's doing, but the recommendations are there. The third thing was, when I was at ESCOM, when load shedding became worse, I called a team of experts in electricity to formulate a plan as to how we could eliminate or we could reduce load shedding. Later on, that plan was presented to the president. He took it upon himself. It's now called the President's Energy Action Plan. That plan was prepared by the board that I chaired and the executive with experts in the field of electricity. In scholarly term, they have plagiarized our document. But that's fine. It's our country. We are all trying to find a solution. So I'm not going to be bothering myself about that. So that's what we did, I think, when we were there at ESCOM. And I will just leave it at that. The second question you asked was this thing about silos and outreach. The University of KwaZulu-Natal, when I was here, and even now, has got extensive outreach programs that are all documented. You just have to go and reach them. The simplest one I gave was introducing isiZulu as a module to study for everybody at the university in order to tap the knowledge. In order to tap the knowledge and research the knowledge that Zulus talk about and that we don't understand. And I often used to joke that, you know, when Silo was alive and he said all foreigners must leave, I was one of them that left, but my turn had come to an end because when I was here, people used to call each other Abantu. And then Mina, they used to call me Sloane. And I didn't like that, but I understood what they were trying to say. But all I'm trying to say was that I think we wanted to tap the knowledge and research it, I think from a position of strength. I have, what is this thing about slogans? I gave you an example of Professor Sibusiso Bengu, who was the first Minister of Education in democratic South Africa. He laid the foundation for the transformation of higher education that is now being carried out. Kada Asmal legislated that process in the transformation of higher education. Ben Gubani established the national system of innovation that is the envy of the world in any other country. He was the first Minister of Science and Technology. Nkosazana Zuma eliminated smoking in the country, which is the envy of the world too. Wherever you go into Europe or you go into Greece, you still find people smoking everywhere. When you come into South Africa, the air is clean a little bit, not completely. But all I'm saying is that there were people who did something except sloganeering, who understood that the challenge of this country, it's about bringing a fundamental change, not for African people, for everybody. So the oppressed and the oppressors had to change because both of them had been damaged by this system that existed of colonialism followed by apartheid. Again, I return to the issue. Remember that the struggle was predicated on change. The Freedom Charter was predicated on change. The Constitution is predicated on change. The National Development Plan is about change. So we have 4 approved documents nationally that says to all of us, guys, do something to change the nature of the society in which we live. I think those are the questions that I needed to ask.
Yes, one here, and then let's have 2 more if there are, yes, 2. Third one, going, yeah, another one there. And then you'll be the last one. So we'll take 4 now, looking at the time. Let's start with you. Thank you.
Thanks a million, MC. Thank you, Prof, for your presentation. My name is Dr. Qanesom Leda, the President of Convocation of UKZN. I think, firstly, I must thank you for this thought-provoking and more educational platform. Before my question, I have only one concern about platforms like these ones, whereby you feel that people who are in the room are people who can be contributory to the struggle of transformation. But the biggest challenge is that there is no follow-up in terms of the submissions that were tabled. That's my concern, because I believe South Africans are the smartest, or black people are the smartest in the world. But I think our problem-solving skill becomes a problem. Hence, I table that concern. My question, Prof, is, I know you understand governance, and I know you also understand the political organizations, how they work. Now, we've got these young professionals here. How would you advise them to contest the space and infiltrate politics? Because, I'm saying this because we elect people in a rally, and people who are elected in that particular rally are members of the organizations which are political. I know, because I'm an activist myself, but I'm a very sober one. I'm not a permissive one, because I went to school and I think I'm also overqualified for my age. That is why I cannot be in a structure where I cannot question. Now, Prof, these are the people who can change this country significantly, and they do have expertise, and they can take us forward as South Africa. Now, how would you advise them to go and contest the space? Because one, academics and professionals are scared to be involved in politics. The reasons is the ones that were tabled, that people are getting killed and whatsoever. Very few of us are not scared to go there and contest the space. I think that's my concern, and I believe that, Prof, we will bring a very educational answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Second, that's...
Thank you very much, and thank you very much, Prof, for that insightful presentation, and I'm definitely one of the people who are looking forward to reading the book. My name is Dumile Cele, and my background is economics. I've only worked in the private sector and within the SOE sector. So I haven't worked in government. And what I'd like to ask you, and I'll present the question and then contextualize, is...
Don't do that, just ask the question.
Correct. Okay, cool. The question really is around what you mentioned about that all the various documents that you spoke about are premised on the struggle to change the lives of the people and to change the livelihoods of the people. Now, coming from the business sector, one thing that keeps me awake at night is the economic non-transformation within South Africa. And and that is displayed by South Africa having the highest Gini coefficient in the world, which for everybody, it's the measure of inequality in terms of economic resources. And I've just got this open here, which says the richest 1% of the world own something like 92% of the world's resources. Okay, so we know that that is predominantly our problem. And in terms of what we are doing in the government space, for example, the ultimate is to bust those three challenges that you spoke about. And I'm sitting here and I'm saying, I'm not sure, you say the future is in our hands. And I'm not sure whether, as you said, that our leaders don't always know what they're doing in the various fields that they're in. And I'm not sure whether we have a real solution to eradicate poverty in this country, which we know has been systematically put in place, not only within an apartheid era, not only within a colonization era, but within the geopolitics of the world going back to year dot in terms of how it has been actually architected. And I'm just hoping that you can speak to that, and the next book will have private sector leaders in the front, because I think we speak about corruption and not realize that government does corruption with private sector who have the money. So I'd love you to just comment on that.
Thank you. We have got 2 questions there, and I really hope they'll just be questions. Right at the back there, you can just ask those questions, and then we will move on. Any mic right at the back there? There are 2 hands, yes.
Firstly, I'd like to greet everyone in the room. My name is Asanda Roxanne Ngobo, and for one, I'd like to, I'm not sure if I can still comment since you said it's strictly questions now, but my comment was going to lead to my question, so do I have the permission to do so?
Can you try and ask the question? Unfortunately, we are really running out of time, yes.
Okay, with time, I'll try to do both. Thank you very much. Firstly, Prof, I'd like to comment on accountability. With accountability, I think it's more of morals of a person than the actual thing to do as a leader in order to account. Because, for example, we get the president there doing whatever he wants with pala cases, etc., etc. And then you question yourself as the youth, how can you then take accountability towards your masses if the very first president, the very first representative of this country is not doing so? And then my question, that was my comments. So then my question, to be honest, I didn't read the book because of fans, etc. But I saw it on Twitter, and I was very intrigued onto, especially the point of transformation. Because as a person who is a student activist, because I'm under the steering command of the EFF, it then becomes a problem onto the accountability and transformation thing in terms of What advice would you, Prof, give us as student activists, and how can we then make political education alive again in institutions and ensure that we are not suppressed as the student activist and we are not afraid to voice out the issues of the students and seek accountability from the ones who are above us? Because as student activists, we do know of the problems that the students are undergoing, but I wouldn't say we are scared, ne? But it's a thing of, I don't know what email will I be getting next because I've voiced out this issue. I've hidden nothing from the students, I've hidden nothing from the masses, but have I gone overbound onto what I've just done? So can you then give us advice, because I see a couple of student activists in the room, what can we then do to ensure that whatever we voice out, whatever that we have to, I'd say, we veza onto the masses, how can we then ensure our safety as students? Because before being student activists, we are also students. Our parents are waiting for degrees back at home. But we are still fighting for students, and those issues are more or less personal to others. Ne? So how do we then ensure our safety and ensure that we carry on living this political debate in our institutions? Thank you.
Thank you. Please ask the question.
Oh, thank you very much, Prof, for such an interesting dialogue. And also I would like to thank the panelists, the two speakers who spoke after you. It was very insightful in terms of interpreting the book itself. It's unfortunate that I haven't read the book, but with the debate that has been taking place today, I think I'm intrigued to actually get a copy. But I've been following the dialogue, but one thing that I've been probing that is missing in terms of transformation, there is no way that I've heard Prof speaking about transformation in attachment to Africa, because one of the things that the late philosopher Kwame Nkrumah was speaking about was that in his first speech, when they attained independence, Ghana was the first country that attained independence in 1957. In his first speech, he said that the democracy of Ghana means nothing if the entire Africa is still under colonialism. So I would also like to get a very answer there in terms of attaching our national transformation to Africa, because it has become like a public secret that we cannot compete with the global actors while we are broken into pieces like this. So how are we then actually attaching our transformation in relation to what the former leaders like Kwame Nkrumah and then the late Muammar Gaddafi, how they envisaged the unity of Africa and how they have envisaged how Africa should do business with the outside world? I would like to get an actual clear answer on that. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for those questions. Over to you, Prof. Once you are done, your other panelists will make their final remarks, and then we'll move on.
Thank you, Program Director. First of all, let me start with the last question, the attachment to Africa. I think in this book, I detail the role of people such as Kwame Nkrumah, such as Julius Nyerere, such as Robert Mugabe, such as Thabo Mbeki, in bringing out this transformation in relation to the identity and connectedness to Africa as South Africans. Remember that as South Africans, we tend to leap over the continent and go to Europe or go to America before we think about our own brothers and sisters in Africa. But in the history of this transformation that I'm talking about, it is attached to African identity, African civilization, and African culture as best as you can through role models that have lived. I think often people never realize how African Nelson Mandela was until you just watch him, I think when he was attending the Rivonia trial, dressed up like an African prince, in a culture that was very colonial and apartheid. Now, just let's come to the current president. I'm sure most of you may be annoyed with him in one way or another, but you remember when President Ramaphosa was inaugurated, he must be the only president who has ever danced with a dance group from Venda. Now, you couldn't ask for somebody who recognizes his identity. I'm talking about identity here, okay? And his roots coming from there to actually, I think, stamp upon the world that this is where he was coming from and this is how he would like to be seen. And I think one has to give him a compliment for that. So what I'm trying to say is that the transformation of South Africa since post-1994 has always been linked to the renaissance of Africa, to the identity of Africa, to the vision that the likes of Kwame Nkrumah saw in 1957 and, what's his name, Kenyatta, Jomo Kenyatta, Julius Nyerere, and so forth. So it's not separate. And of course, you come to people like Muammar Gaddafi, and so forth. The next question that I wanted to deal with was this thing of advising people about the political space. I think it's either Socrates or one of the Greek gurus who says that man is a political animal or something like that. I'm not too educated in that. I think all of us are activists and are political in one way or another. And I make this in this book. I belong to no party. I have never belonged to a party. But I've participated in the transformation of my own country, working with politicians that belong to a party. Somewhere in that process, I've succeeded. In other ways, I have failed. But I accept that I have been active. I've been able to put my thoughts across. So the point I'm trying to make is that you don't have to be a politician to make a contribution or a meaningful contribution to the transformation of your own country. You all occupy spaces of one form or another. Use that space. When I was here, I used to talk to the SRC a little bit. And one of the things I used to say to SRCs was, one, when Biko was a student, he not only was an activist, but he put his ideas in forms of books or in forms of articles. Today, we can debate Steve Biko, what he thought, what he thinks, whether his philosophy was correct or not. Think of a modern young activist leader today and ask, what book have they written? What articles have they written? We don't seem to have a culture of, we have ideas, but we don't put them. We've fallen back to that tradition that is popularly known for Africans as oral history. And it doesn't last long. It never gets recorded anywhere. So all I'm going to say is to advise young students who are activists, write down your thoughts. Okay? I have written this book. I'm not saying it's an answer to the problems of South Africa because I'm not Jesus Christ. I'm just Makhoba. But I've put it there out into the market for people to criticize me, some to compliment, but to say there are things we need to think about if you read the book. So I'm not providing a complete solution. I'm providing a perspective to a solution. And you can either say, this idea is rubbish, let's forget it. This idea is good. But you have it in writing and it's on record. Even when I'm not on this planet, it will be there. So there is something about documenting and not being a politician, but taking and claiming the space in which you are in order to make a contribution. That is the only advice I can give, because we all have these roles to play in different ways. And I want to emphasize, I belong to no party, and I shall not belong to any party. The other one, I think, the other question dealt with the private sector and the public sector being corrupt. There is no doubt that corruption in South Africa takes place either within government or in the private sector, or between the two of them. This is not, I think it's all documented, but I think sometimes the media sings the song as if corruption is only in government. I think we must disabuse ourselves from that. All people who read and do research know that there's a lot of corruption in both the private sector and so forth. Now, we are an unequal society, the most unequal society in the world. As I said, if you read the National Development Plan, you will discover that there are processes that were articulated in the National Development Plan, and one of those fundamental was that if the economy of the country was to grow about 5%, we could create this kind of jobs. It has never grown to that level. Of course, it is of our making that it hasn't grown to that level, or maybe with some additional global factors like COVID and so forth. But we haven't grown up to that, and therefore, because our economic growth is slow, we can't create the number of jobs and deal with unemployment and so forth. Remember that even the time when Mbeki was president, when the economy was growing high, it didn't really actually deal with unemployment as effectively as it should. So there is something that economists, I must say I'm not one of them, need to think about and deal with. Now, in medicine, there are two ways that we don't use. And this comes to a question that was asked earlier on. What did I learn from my medical training or something like that? We never use the word always in medicine, because nothing is always, always. And we don't use the word never, because such things in medicine medicine is unpredictable. So we don't use those words. And in fact, it's funny, you know, when you ask multiple choices in medicine and you use the word never, immediately you know it's wrong. You don't have to go to school for that, because there are no such things in the language. So we must be very careful. That's why I'm saying to you that I'm not providing a total answer. I'm providing a perspective, an eye that looks into a problem. And that eye, as I've said in my book, I may be wrong, but it nevertheless needs to be thought about and needs to be considered and be reflected upon. It may solve or it may worsen the problem, or it may make people clearer as to what the actual problem is. You know, that's the nature of what I have been trying to do. The last question I'm going to answer is the most difficult one. It's the one about accountability. And I can understand why it comes from the command, students in command. First of all, one of the things that we have to appreciate is that we have created a government where lack of accountability has become an issue. And if you seek accountability, you become the villain rather than the solution. And it speaks to the issue as to if you are complaining or you are raising issues, where do you cross the boundary where you are still a participant that is respected rather than a participant who is seen as a nuisance and therefore must be denied opportunities? I mean, obviously, that dynamic, it's something that I think as a student body belonging to different parties, you have to sit amongst yourself and say, is this point that we are making crossing the boundaries of proper debate that allows us to move forward a step further? Let me give you an example that is not necessarily good, but I will put it this way. This room here has got about, 4 kind of walls, that one, this one, and that one. If you want to change this room and you break these 2 walls, this whole thing will collapse. So if you want to change this room, you must ask yourself, what are the things that I must do in order to bring a change? If you break that wall there alone, nothing will collapse here. So even when you're conducting something as philosophical as transformation, you must ask yourself, there are the following things that I want to transform, but what is the one that is going to have an impact? So that you transform that and there's a domino effect. Or you transform this one and know that I've still got 3 other things to transform in order to have a domino effect. You must be clear when you are leading that process, rather than think it will just happen by chance because everything has to be transformed. So when I was health ombud, I had this investigation called the Life as a Demanding.
Yes.
That some of you might have heard about. As I was doing the investigation, I came, more or less, it became clear to me that the politicians had done what they had done because they knew that they would not be held accountable. But people had died, and nobody was to be held accountable. And when I was formulating my findings and recommendations, this preoccupied me as to how do I get politicians to be accountable. And as you would remember, we have had Marikana. It took about 4 years to do the Falam Commission, and nobody has been found to be accountable. And I was doing this investigation, and the people whose relatives had died were calling me a hired gun, that I was hired to protect the officials in the government. And I knew that was not the case. So at the moment, you have to define where you place the accountability, how you placed it, and I'm relatively pleased that all the lawyers that have gone through my report have found that there are 3 people in that structure that must be held accountable. And those are the 3 people that I had identified. And several advocates have looked at the report and have got a measure of where the limits of that accountability is. Now, obviously, the relatives want blood on the floor because their relatives have died. But in my investigations, I never found that there was an intention to murder people. People did die, but it was never the intentions of the people who were doing the work. So you have to think about all of these things so that you just don't leave your findings open to every interpretation that is possible, because you were fortunate enough to be inside the tent. So you don't piss outside the tent, you piss inside the tent. So I hope I've tried, but it's not an easy thing. You just have to discuss it with your peers and your colleagues as to where are your limits and in what way I think you can structure those limits such that they don't disadvantage and don't make you a villain. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof, for the questions, for the lessons on leadership. You are really educating us in many ways today. Let's have the panelists here responding briefly to you.
Yes, thank you very much. I think the first point I want to emphasize is that there needs to be a culture of self-accountability. And this has to happen at multiple levels, not just at the higher levels of leadership, but even as members of communities, as ward councillors, as members of political parties. Are we accountable to ourselves? Do we critique ourselves when we have failed, and are we willing to face the consequences? That's the first point. The second point I want to emphasize is that of African agency. And what this means is that in addition to the state, there are many other actors within the African continent that are playing significant roles in transformation. Civil society, we have community-based organizations, faith and religious groups, and individuals as well. And so when we talk about change, we need to look down as well and see how we are making change within our communities, because that's where vulnerability is, and that's where people want to see change. And so in summing up, what values do we have as Africans? What values shape us as we interact with each other, and how we treat each other? What values define us? Have we lost those values? Why did we lose them? And how do we regain those values that can shape how we interact with each other and how we contribute to transformation? And in conclusion, I really encourage you to read this book. It is very easy and simple and humane, and it really gets you, questioning leadership as you see it and giving you ideas about how you can be change as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes.
The book is very timely, especially because it analyzes 4 out of 5 presidents we have had in South Africa. It gives us a chance, as we are voting next year, it gives us a chance to reflect as a country. What kind of leadership do we need? What kind of people do you want in Pretoria next year, from next year onwards? It gives us time to shape. It is really up to us to shape the country we want. Are we happy with the kind of leadership we have? Do we need change? And what kind of change we need? And we are going to be accountable to our children in 30 years' time. We are going to be answering, what did we do? And Professor Makgoba here has given us a template of things we can do to actually change the country. And thank you very much for coming back to South Africa. And thank you for staying, even though it was not even convenient for you to stay. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. We are going to have the publisher, Dr. Mutobi Mutlwase, coming forward. In fact, for me, Prof, if I may say one thing that moved me when I saw the book was to realize that you gave it to a black publisher who has been publishing for years, for decades, for 40 years. You could have, any publisher would have loved to publish a book by Professor Makgoba, but he intentionally and consciously gave it to a black publisher to publish it, and I honor that. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. I am encouraged to see so many young people. I am slightly worried when they defer the answer to who is a leader. They think a leader is from somewhere. The Messiah is not coming. The Messiah is you. If only you would emerge. Are you aware that Stephen Bantu Biko was merely 31 when he was killed? He created a future for himself. And he's quite right, Professor Makgoba says, he wrote. You can't be a leader if you are not a listener. If you can't write, you can't be a reader or a listener. So you need to start with the basics of conceptualization. You must read and read and read and read and read. Then you can speak from conviction, from an informed position. I know, therefore, I am liberated. And it is quite true. You can't be liberated in the mind when you are uninformed. You can't lead a people if you can't be a servant first. Therefore, the answer is not to be found anywhere else. I think you have it within your means to emerge and save this country. We were asked a question, why did I agree to this book and not any other book? How did I then accept another political interpretation? It is not true. It's a scientific analysis that is true, timely, and it's a warning we would ignore at our peril. In 9 months' time, this country must decide, do we regress further or do we overcome our economic, our political, our cultural contradictions? Because the people are asking, the ordinary people, what was it with this struggle that you learned people have been parading, telling us? What was it with when 45% of the population is unemployed? It's 55% among young people who are gradually becoming unemployable, not unemployed. Who will create the jobs unless it's us? We are the last continent on the continent, so we can't go anywhere else. We can't emigrate as black people. As Africans, have we isolated ourselves from the rest of the continent? Enoch Sontonga didn't write carelessly about Ngozi Sikelel Africa. He didn't say South Africa. He said the continent. The Horn that he refers to, Upondolwayo, is it not part of the East, Somalia? Right? And what else again? Sudan? So how could we be Afrophobic as Africans? How can we say we are only natives of the southern part, not knowing economically our solution lies in Africa, not in Europe, neither in China. It's here. It's our only home. And it's the origins of mankind. Forget about what the Bible says. Man is born in Africa. So you are the first peoples of the world, but you are the last economically, right? Now, this book by Professor Makgoba is a warning. We have one chance to free our country, one chance to create a future for your children and your children's children, my grandchildren, and their own children. We, our own liberators. It is true. It is true. It hurts when you are oppressed by your own kith and kin. When your own are robbing you, stealing the fiscus like nobody's business. And it's true. Chief Justice Zondo is worried. The recommendations of the Zondo Commission are going to be ignored. Are going to be ignored. You'll have the other people saying, it is not true, we are looking into them. In 9 months, how are they going to answer, is it 32 of the serious questions? When they have to be doing electioneering at the end of this month. So it is also important. This book was created out of a serious patriotic concern by the author. I could have also ducked and dived that it is too controversial because not one single politician has dared ask why we published it. It's because they haven't read it. They will not read it. It is not sugarcoating anything. And it does say there is no hope in the current cabinet. There is no hope either among the deputy ministers. I think the author says they are looting the state because they are being paid for not services being rendered. So all I would like to say to young people, even if you don't do it for somebody else, do it in memory of Stephen Bantu Biko, who was a student here.
Yes. Yes.
He paid the ultimate price to create a system in which Africa would give a human face to the peoples of the world. He tried as a young person. I think it was only a matter of how many years? 6 years.
Yeah.
6 years before they removed him. But he had written down his thoughts. Yeah. And that's the distinction we are trying to highlight. Write them down. It does not matter even if you can't spell. Just write them down. You'll use spell check, right? But your thoughts are your own creation. And you will feel emboldened when you read them the next day. Yeah. Did I write this? Yes. And then you share it with somebody else who would become your echo chamber, who says, I also had those thoughts, but I was afraid. Like somebody was trying to say, I would be criticized. It is part and parcel of being a visionary to be criticized. But if you don't get criticism, only praise, you are in trouble. You are creating what? Stalkers. You're creating what? The same team of people who dared not question you. So young people, I think this university may be creating a platform that allows you to rise. You are aware what Maya Angelou says in her poem, still you will put me down, but. So why are you sitting down now? It's a metaphor. So I would say to the university, we are humbled that you invited us to host this book launch, but also to socialize with a former colleague of my wife from the SACC, Professor Masbuko there. We come a long way. She was an activist. Oh, was she not an activist? Ooh. Have you mellowed, madam? Never. So I am saying, as a last word, I'd like to send a question and answer session to the university. It's an assignment I'm giving the university. Do you want to hear it? Are you ready? Are you going to take part in a question and answer? I would like you to ask the question, what about each time I give you a name or names? Okay? Pardon? You don't want to do that? You want to hear? What about Princess Magugu Kadinizul? What about her? Is she going to be remembered in this university? When? What about Ruben Tolagere Kaluza? Do you know him? No? That's an assignment for who? The university. What about Ned Nakasa? Do you know him? Yes. Well, let's say Mafika Gwala? Yes. Obed Kunere? Yes. Louis Ngozi? Yes. Alfred and Petty Nogwe? Yes. Bushim Tlongo? Sipo Gumere, B.W. Vilagazi, Kabim Goma, Raymond Mazizi Kunene, the Loma brothers, HIE and Rolls, Roger Shishi, and lastly, Nokutela Dube, formerly Ndima, and Ndongeni Katkoki. So I am asking the University Council to respond to all those questions on your behalf. How long should we give them time to answer? 6 months? Pardon? 6 weeks? Well, I'll hear from you in 6 months.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Akaxosha umuntu omdala ekhuluma. Uyalinda nje. Thank you very much for this event, and we are really grateful to Professor Makgoba for coming and launching the book here, to the panelists who've done so well for this, to Professor Mkhize, our DVC, who did the welcome and graced this event, everyone else, and also the corporate relations of our university that has facilitated this day. Can we give them a round of applause? So you have the director here, Ms. Nomazondo, and then you have Sli Kunu there, you have Oli Swazulu somewhere, and other people, members of the team, and all of you for having come. This has been a great, great, great event. We really thank you for participating, and the students, and even the command and everyone. Thank you for being here. Thank you. Okay, it's over. It's done. Thank you so much.